My name is Mason Whitaker, and I turned 30 with my brother's hand across my face. 10 seconds earlier, I had been holding the biggest gift anyone had ever given me, a check for $100,000 from my grandfather. I had barely read the amount twice when Garrett followed me into the study, slammed the door behind him, and turned the lock. "Give it to me." I actually thought he was joking. Garrett had always been dramatic when money was involved. Then he stepped closer, and I saw his jaw working like he was chewing glass. His eyes never left the check. "It's mine," I said. "Grandpa gave it to me." His palm cracked across my face before I could move. For a second, I did not feel pain. I heard it first, that sharp, ugly sound bouncing off the bookshelves. Then heat spread across my cheek, and my ears started ringing. Garrett grabbed my wrist. "Hand it over," he hissed, "or I'm calling 911. That threat made no sense. He had hit me. He had locked the door. But there was panic under his anger. And that was what scared me. He was not trying to get help. He was trying to erase something. I twisted free, shoved past him, unlocked the door, and walked out before my body decided to swing back. I did not explain the red mark on my face to anyone in the hallway. I did not stop when my mother called my name. I drove straight to the bank with the envelope bent in my fist. The branch manager examined the check, typed the number into his computer, and went completely still. Then he looked at the screen, looked at me, and quietly closed his office door. "Sir," he said, his face draining of color, "do not leave this building. Please call the police." Before I tell you what the bank manager found on that screen, take a second and tell me where you are listening from. Drop your city, your time, and whether the weather outside matches the mood of this story. I always wonder how far stories like this travel before they find the person who needs to hear them. The manager introduced himself as Daniel Mercer. He did not shake my hand. He kept both palms flat on the desk, like he was afraid any sudden movement might make me bolt. "Is this the original check?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "My grandfather wrote it less than an hour ago. Did anyone photograph it?" That question made the heat in my face spread into my neck. "I don't know." Daniel turned his monitor slightly, not enough for me to read every line, but enough for me to see my own name attached to an account I had never opened. The check number in his system matched the one in my hand. According to the bank, the check had already been submitted through mobile deposit 42 minutes earlier. The receiving account was under the name Mason Whitaker Property Services. I had never owned a company by that name. I had never even banked with that institution. Daniel pointed to a yellow warning banner on the screen. "The deposit is on hold because the image failed several security checks," he said. "Whoever submitted it used a photograph of your driver's license, your social security number, and an address associated with you. But the device location and phone number do not match your customer profile." My cheek still burned where Garrett had hit me. Suddenly, his demand was not jealousy, it was not rage. He wanted the physical check because it could prove the mobile deposit was fake. I called the police from Daniel's office. While we waited, he placed the original check inside a clear evidence sleeve and told me not to touch it again. Then he asked the fraud department to preserve the mobile deposit image, device data, account application, and lobby footage from that morning. My grandfather arrived before the officers did. His name was Harold Whitaker, and at 78, he still carried himself like the contractor he had been most of his life. Shoulders squared, boots polished, hands scarred from 40 years of framing houses, pouring concrete, and trusting a man's word when he shook on it. The second he saw my face, something in him broke. Who did that? I had spent the entire drive telling myself I was calm. I was not. Saying my brother's name out loud felt like opening a door I could never close again. "Garrett," I said. Grandpa closed his eyes. He did not look surprised enough. That scared me more than Daniel's computer screen. 2 uniformed officers came in with a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. Her name was Rachel Monroe. She had the kind of face that did not waste emotion, but her eyes moved over everything: the check sleeve, the mark on my cheek, Grandpa's hands, my phone sitting face up on the desk. She separated us for statements. I told her about the birthday gift, the study door, the lock turning, Garrett's hand across my face, and the threat to call 911 if I did not give him the check. I hated how flat my voice sounded, like I was describing damage to someone else's truck. Grandpa confirmed that he had written the check himself. The signature was real, the account was his, the amount was intentional. Then Detective Monroe asked him the question that changed the shape of the whole day. "Mr. Whitaker, has anyone recently had access to your checkbook, online banking, tax records, or personal identification documents?" Grandpa stared at the desk for a long second. "My grandson helps me with bills." "Garrett," I asked. He nodded once. Daniel returned with a printed copy of the mobile deposit image. It was blurry, but I saw enough. It was not a forged check made from scratch. It was a photograph of the check I had just brought in. The folds in the envelope matched. So did a tiny ink smear near the first zero. Someone had opened the envelope before Grandpa gave it to me, photographed the check, sealed it back up, and waited for me to receive it like nothing had happened. Detective Monroe asked whether Garrett had been alone near the gifts that morning. Grandpa's jaw tightened. I asked him to carry a few envelopes from the kitchen to the study. My stomach went cold. Garrett had known what I was getting before I did. Then Daniel showed us the account application. My stolen identity had been used, but the recovery phone number ended in 4 digits I recognized. Garrett had used that number on a prepaid phone after claiming his regular one was broken. Grandpa's face hardened in a way I had rarely seen. How much was he trying to steal? He asked. Daniel answered carefully. Today, $100,000. The word today sat there like a second body in the room. Detective Monroe heard it too. We need to find out what happened before today, she said. Grandpa reached into his jacket and pulled out his house keys. His hand trembled for the first time. There are statements in my office, he said. Some have gone missing. I thought I misplaced them. I stood in that bank office remembering every time Garrett had called me paranoid for asking about his money problems. Every time Mom said he was under pressure. Every time I had covered a late bill because family was supposed to help family. My phone started vibrating across Daniel Mercer's desk. Garrett. Detective Monroe looked at the screen, then at me. Do not answer yet. The call stopped. A message appeared. Bring me the check or Grandpa goes down with you. Before I could breathe, a second one came in. You have no idea what you signed. Detective Monroe photographed both messages. Mason, she said, have you ever signed financial documents involving your grandfather? The shame hit before the anger did. 6 months earlier, Garrett had brought me a folder while I was helping Mom move a broken dresser out of her garage. He said Grandpa needed updated emergency contact paperwork. He told me my signature only confirmed I could speak to doctors if Grandpa had a fall or ended up in the hospital. I signed 2 pages without reading the whole packet. I hated admitting that. I was 30 years old. I worked with contracts. I knew better, but it had been family, and family was the place where I kept lowering my guard. Grandpa remembered the folder too. Garrett had told him almost the same thing, except Grandpa had been asked to sign a page naming Garrett as a temporary financial assistant just in case. Detective Monroe did not accuse either of us of anything, but her tone changed. Until we see those documents, we do not assume what they are, she said. But if he combined real signatures with stolen identification, he may have created authority neither of you meant to give. The officers photographed the swelling on my cheek. I gave a formal statement and let them copy my messages. Daniel froze the fraudulent account before the mobile deposit could clear. My real check was now evidence, and for the first time that day, I stopped caring about the money. I cared about how much of our lives Garrett had already touched. I stayed that night at Blake Harlan's apartment. Blake was my closest friend and a business litigation attorney, which meant he did not waste time telling me everything would be fine. He put coffee in front of me, opened a legal pad, and started writing. Credit freeze, passwords, new driver's license, full credit reports, save every message, no private conversations with anyone who might run back to Garrett. That last one mattered more than I wanted to admit. My mother called 17 times. When I finally answered, Elaine Whitaker was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She had spent my whole life translating Garrett's behavior into softer language. He did not steal. He borrowed. He did not lie. He panicked. He did not manipulate people. He needed help. Mason, she said. Garrett says you attacked him. I looked across Blake's kitchen table. He could hear every word through the speaker. He hit me. A pause. He says you shoved him first. Of course he did. Did he tell you he opened a bank account in my name? What did he tell you? He photographed Grandpa's check before I got it and tried to deposit it using my social security number. Her breathing changed. He said there was a misunderstanding. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny left in me. A misunderstanding does not require my social security number. Mason, please don't make this bigger. There it was, the family prayer. The sentence that had protected Garrett through unpaid debts, gambling rumors, broken promises, and every angry outburst we were told to forget by dinner. I looked at the bruise forming on my face in Blake's dark window. For years, I thought silence was how a man kept peace. That night, I finally understood. Silence had only made Garrett safer. I'm not making it bigger, I said. I'm refusing to make it smaller. Then I ended the call. The next morning, Detective Monroe asked me to meet her at Grandpa's house, while officers supervised a review of his office. Nothing was broken. That was the part that made my skin crawl. No forced drawers, no shattered lock, no file cabinet ripped open. Whoever had taken records from that room knew exactly where Grandpa kept things, and more importantly, had been welcomed into that house enough times to move around without suspicion. We found 3 years of bank statements in a locked cabinet. 6 monthly statements were missing. Grandpa's laptop showed repeated logins from an unfamiliar device. His email had a forwarding rule buried so deep, he never would have found it. Any message containing words like bank, transfer, statement, or verification had been silently copied to an address none of us recognized. Blake printed everything before the rule was disabled. Then Grandpa opened an old checkbook drawer and found a carbon copy that made him sit down slowly. Monthly payments of $3,850 had been going to a company called Ridgeway Asset Consulting. Grandpa had never hired that company. The business registration listed Garrett Whitaker as the organizer. Over the previous 18 months, nearly $70,000 had moved from Grandpa's account into Ridgeway. The transaction notes called the payments maintenance fees for rental properties, but Grandpa had sold his last rental house 4 years earlier. He stared at the paper for a long time. I trusted him, he said. No shouting, no curse words, just that one sentence, quiet enough to hurt worse than rage. That was when my fear turned into something harder. Garrett had counted on our love becoming embarrassment. He believed Grandpa would rather lose money than admit his own grandson had deceived him. He believed I would rather surrender the check than admit I had signed papers without reading them. He had studied every weakness in our family and turned each one into a lock. Detective Monroe asked if I was willing to make a controlled call. Garrett still believed I had the original check. If I let him talk, he might explain what he wanted me to do with it. More importantly, he might explain what he thought I had signed. I agreed. Not because I felt brave. I did not. My hands were cold, my cheeks still ached, and every part of me wanted to throw my phone into a drawer and pretend my brother was still just irresponsible instead of dangerous, but pretending had gotten us here. With Detective Monroe recording through approved equipment, I called Garrett from Grandpa's kitchen. He answered on the first ring. Finally, he snapped. Do you have it? Yes. Then stop being stupid and bring it to me. I looked at Detective Monroe. She raised one finger, reminding me to slow down. What did I sign? Garrett, silence. Then his voice dropped. You signed what you needed to sign. That's not an answer. You signed documents saying Grandpa authorized us to manage certain funds. If you run to the cops, those papers make you part of it. My grip tightened around the phone. Part of what don't play innocent with me, he said. Bring me the original check. Once I have it, I can fix the deposit, close the account, and make the paperwork disappear. There it was. Not a full confession, not enough for a movie scene, but enough to show he knew about the fake account. The duplicate deposit, and the paperwork he was using like a blade against my throat. Why did you use my name? I asked. Garrett exhaled like I was the idiot in the room. Because yours was clean. The words hit colder than his hand had. My clean credit, my quiet life, every bill I paid on time, every year I stayed careful so I would never owe anyone anything. He had not respected that. He had weaponized it. Then Garrett added, and because nobody ever believes you over me. For most of my life, that sentence would have gutted me. This time, I looked at Grandpa, at Detective Monroe, and at the record spread across the kitchen table. This time, I said, you don't get to decide who believes me. Garrett went silent. Then the line went dead. The recording gave Detective Monroe enough to expand the investigation, but she warned me about what came next. When people like your brother realize the money is blocked, she said, they usually stop trying to look innocent and start trying to make the victim look guilty. She was right. By noon, Garrett had texted half the family, saying I had manipulated Grandpa into giving me his savings. By evening, he posted a vague statement online about elder abuse inside our own family. He never used my name, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. My phone filled with messages. An aunt asked if Grandpa was still competent. A cousin said I should split the check because a man doesn't call the police on his brother over money. A family friend told me that even if Garrett had made a mistake, dragging him into a criminal case was cruel. Not one person asked why my face was bruised. That was the part I could not stop staring at. They had questions about Grandpa's mind, Garrett's stress, my attitude, the check, the police, the family name, but not one question about the mark his hand had left on my skin. Blake helped me write one response. Grandpa was safe. The bank had identified suspected fraud. Law enforcement was handling the matter. I would not discuss evidence privately. Then I turned off notifications. The next discovery came from my credit report. Blake printed it at his kitchen table and went quiet halfway down the second page. That was how I knew it was bad. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name over the previous year. The balances totaled a little over $26,000. For a minute, I just stared at the numbers. They looked too clean to be real. Minimum payments, billing cycles, interest charges, late fees attached to a life I had never lived. The mailing address was a private mailbox rented through Ridgeway Asset Consulting, Garrett's company. One card had been used for online betting, another for hotel rooms in cities he claimed he had only visited for work. The third had paid for the luxury watch he wore at my birthday dinner. I remembered noticing that watch. I remembered saying. Knew Garrett had smiled, held up his wrist, and said, "Hard work finally pays off." I almost admired how easily he lied. Grandpa's forensic accountant found the next layer 2 days later. The monthly transfers to Ridgeway were only part of the scheme. Garrett had used the false authorization documents to request a line of credit secured against Grandpa's house. The application had not closed yet, but final approval was scheduled for the following week. If the birthday check had cleared into the fake account, Garrett planned to use that money as proof of liquidity. Then he could move funds around before the bank finished reviewing the mobile deposit. The total exposure was more than $200,000. Grandpa listened without interrupting. He did not ask how Garrett could do it. He did not ask why we had not seen it sooner. He just looked around the old house he had built with his own hands and said he was going to put a lien on my home. That sentence changed the room. Garrett had not just stolen money. He had aimed at the roof over Grandpa's head. Grandpa asked Blake to arrange a meeting with an estate attorney that same afternoon. By sunset, Garrett was removed as alternate executor. Every authorization carrying his name was canceled. A formal fraud alert was placed on Grandpa's property title, and the bank locked down every account Garrett had ever helped him access. Then Grandpa changed the locks. My mother arrived, while the locksmith was still working. Elaine stood in the driveway staring at the new deadbolt like it was a funeral notice nailed to the door. "You're locking your own grandson out?" she asked. Grandpa looked at her for a long time. He locked Mason in a room and hid him. He said he used his identity. He used mine. "The question is not why I'm locking him out. The question is why we kept giving him keys." Mom flinched like the sentence had crossed the driveway and struck her. For once, she did not defend Garrett immediately. She sat on the porch steps, covered her face, and admitted he had been asking her for money for months. Almost $30,000 from her retirement account. Money she said was for house repairs. Money she gave him because he claimed he owed dangerous people. "Did you believe him?" I asked. She wiped her face. "I believed he was scared. That is not the same as believing he was honest." She nodded, crying quietly, and for the first time in my life. I did not rush to make my mother feel better. That night, Garrett called Grandpa from a number none of us recognized. Detective Monroe had already arranged for future calls to be preserved. So Grandpa answered on speaker, while the rest of us stayed silent around Blake's kitchen table. "You changed the locks," Garrett said. "Yes," Grandpa replied. "You let Mason turn you against me." "No," Grandpa said. "You did that yourself." Garrett's voice sharpened. "He signed the papers too. If I go down, he goes down." I felt the old instinct rise in my chest. Explain, defend, prove. I had not known. Beg Grandpa not to doubt me, but Grandpa never looked away from the phone. "Then bring copies of every document," he said. "Tomorrow, Blake Harlan's office. We settle this privately." Garrett paused. "And the check, Mason will bring it." I looked at Detective Monroe. That part had been her idea. The original check would stay secured at the bank. I would bring a photocopy sealed inside the same kind of envelope. Harmless, but convincing enough to make Garrett believe he still had leverage. The meeting would be coordinated with investigators. The goal was not to provoke him. It was to let Garrett explain, in his own words, the documents he claimed could bury me. The next afternoon, Garrett walked into Blake Harlan's conference room, wearing a navy suit and the watch he had bought with my stolen credit. He looked tired, but not scared. That was the disturbing part. Garrett still believed this was a negotiation. His eyes landed on the envelope in front of me, and he smiled. "There he is," he said. "The reasonable brother." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of documents bearing my signature and Grandpa's. At first glance, they looked official enough to scare me. The language was dense. The notary seals looked real. My name sat at the bottom of pages I did not remember reading. Blake studied them for less than a minute before his expression hardened. "Different fonts," he said, "different margins. And this notary stamp is from a county neither Mason nor Harold visited." Garrett's smile thinned. He tapped the envelope. "Give me that, and I'll destroy these." "What happens after you destroy them?" I asked. "The account gets closed. Grandpa gets his money back eventually. You tell the police you overreacted, and the cards in my name." His jaw tightened. "And Ridgeway?" I asked. "And the line of credit against Grandpa's house?" Garrett looked toward the door. "You set me up." "No," I said. "I finally read what you put in front of me." He stood so fast his chair hit the wall. Grandpa put one scarred hand over the envelope. "You stole from me," he said. Garrett snapped. "I was going to pay it back with what Grandpa asked." Garrett's face twisted. "With the check you should have given me in the first place." The room went dead silent. Then Garrett realized what he had said. He shoved Grandpa's hand away, snatched the envelope, and tore it open. When he saw the photocopy, panic replaced rage. Detective Monroe stepped in from the hall. Garrett Whitaker, stop. But Garrett bolted through the rear exit, leaving the forged documents on the table behind him. Garrett was not arrested at Blake's office. Detective Monroe had enough to question him, but the investigators wanted the financial records tied directly to him before they moved. And technically, during that meeting, he had not hit anyone, not yet. He had threatened, lied, grabbed, and run, but the law still needed its clean line. By the time officers reached his apartment, Garrett was gone for the next 48 hours. He became a shadow around the edges of our lives. He left my mother voice messages saying I had ruined him. He emailed Grandpa from an encrypted address and promised to return every dollar if we withdrew our statements. He called relatives and told them I had fabricated the fraud because I wanted the entire inheritance. Every version made him more innocent. Every version made me more monstrous. Then someone broke into Grandpa's house. The new lock had been forced shortly after midnight. The outside security camera caught Garrett coming through the side door with his hood pulled low. He moved through the house like a man who had practiced the route in his head. Straight to the office, straight to the drawers, straight to the 2 document boxes he believed still mattered. He carried out Grandpa's laptop too. What Garrett did not know was that Detective Monroe had asked us to install a second camera inside the office. That camera caught his face clearly when his hood slipped. He also did not know the laptop had been replaced with an old machine containing nothing useful. At 2:13 a.m., my truck alarm went off outside Blake's building. We watched from an upstairs window as a dark figure opened the rear door and leaned inside. Police arrived before we went down, but the person fled through the alley. In the back seat, officers found a canvas bag. Inside were blank checks from Grandpa's missing checkbook, copies of the forged documents, and one of the credit cards opened in my name. For a few seconds, I could not speak. If we had found that bag without cameras, without bank records, without the controlled call, it might have looked convincing. Garrett had not simply planned to steal from me. He had planned to leave me carrying his crimes. Detective Monroe showed me the side door footage and asked, "Do you recognize this man?" I looked at the screen. "That's my brother," I said. The sentence hurt, but it no longer weakened me. Investigators obtained warrants for Garrett's apartment, storage unit, digital accounts, and Ridgeway Asset Consulting records. What they found was not chaos. That was what made it worse. Betting statements were stacked in labeled folders. Counterfeit notary stamps were wrapped in cloth inside a desk drawer. Copies of my driver's license and social security card sat beside Grandpa's missing bank statements like office supplies. Then Detective Monroe told me about the spreadsheet. She could not show me the whole thing, but Grandpa was allowed to see enough to understand how far Garrett had gone. It listed relatives by name. Next to each person was an amount Garrett believed they could be pressured to give him, along with notes about what kind of story would work best. Sick parent, dangerous debt, business opportunity, emergency loan. Beside my mother's name, he had written, soft under guilt, useful by phone. Beside Grandpa's name, prideful, avoid direct accusation, will hide embarrassment. Then came mine, clean credit, guilt responsive, likely to comply if mom calls. I read that line twice. Every late night request for help, every emergency. Every time Mom called and said Garrett just needed one more chance suddenly looked different. He had not misunderstood my loyalty. He had measured it. Mom asked to hear the evidence Garrett had sent her. She opened her phone with shaking hands and played his latest message. "Tell Mason to drop it," Garrett's voice said. "If he doesn't, I'll make sure everyone knows he stole from Grandpa. You know people will believe you. Say you saw him taking the checkbook. Mom stopped the recording. He wants me to lie." I looked at her. "He expected you to. Our extended family already had a Sunday lunch planned for Grandpa's birthday week." Garrett knew about it. Detective Monroe believed he might show up because he still thought family pressure was his strongest weapon. He had used shame for years. He knew how a room full of relatives could make one person feel like the problem just for naming the truth out loud. She advised us not to create a confrontation. Grandpa refused to cancel. "He has used this family as a shield," he said. "I am done hiding behind the same shield." So we went. Not for drama, not for revenge, not for some grand public takedown. There was no projector, no printed packet passed around the table, no speech rehearsed for applause. Grandpa simply stood in his own dining room before lunch was served and told everyone the truth in plain language. The bank had identified a fraudulent deposit. Accounts had been opened in my name. Money had been diverted from his. Law enforcement was investigating. He asked relatives not to contact Garrett, not to repeat details, and not to interfere with the case. Half the room looked ashamed. The cousin, who had told me a real man would handle it privately, stared down at his plate. My aunt, the same one who had questioned whether Grandpa was competent, whispered, "Mason, I'm sorry." I nodded once. I did not trust myself to say anything generous. Then the front door opened. Garrett walked in wearing yesterday's clothes. His face was unshaven, his hair was messy, and the expensive watch was gone. For 1 second, he looked around the room and understood Grandpa had spoken first. His expression changed. "So this is the trial," he said. Grandpa turned toward him. "No," he said, "that comes later." Garrett laughed like the room had disappointed him. Then he pointed at me. "He planned all of this. He hated that Grandpa trusted me. He's been waiting for a chance to cut me out." My mother stood up, slowly. I had never seen her place herself between Garrett and me before. "Did you ask me to lie?" she said. Garrett blinked. "Mom, you don't understand. Did you ask me to say I saw Mason taking Grandpa's checkbook?" His face tightened. "I was trying to protect us. Did you use his identity?" Garrett looked at the relatives watching him, and he made the mistake he had always made. He performed instead of telling the truth. "Mason gave me permission," he said. "He knew about the account. I took out my phone. Detective Monroe had authorized us to preserve and use the recording if Garrett made that exact claim. I pressed play. Garrett's voice filled the room. "Because yours was clean." Nobody moved. Then came the line he had trusted more than any forged document. "Nobody ever believes you over me." My mother covered her mouth. Grandpa closed his eyes. Garrett lunged for my phone. Grandpa stepped forward to block him, and Garrett shoved him sideways into a chair. 2 officers, waiting in the adjacent room, came in immediately. Garrett fought when they took his arms, shouting that the evidence was fake, that I had stolen his future, that I had poisoned everyone against him. As they pulled him toward the door, he twisted around and stared at me. "You think you won," he yelled. "You destroyed this family." I looked at my mother holding Grandpa's shoulder. I looked at the relatives who could no longer pretend they did not know. Then I looked at my brother. "No," I said. "I stopped you from destroying what was left." The door closed behind him. For the first time in years, nobody ran after Garrett. Garrett's arrest did not give me the clean relief I expected. It gave me paperwork. Interviews, hearings, calls from numbers I did not recognize. Nights where I woke up already angry because my body still thought somebody was about to accuse me of something he had done. His attorney tried the obvious defense first. Family loans, misunderstanding, shared permission, a brother helping manage complicated money. Then he claimed I had knowingly allowed Garrett to use my information for the business account, and only turned on him after Grandpa gave me the check instead. But the forged documents created a problem his explanations could not walk around. The bank's device records placed the fraudulent mobile deposit on Garrett's prepaid phone. The account application included a selfie where he had hidden most of his face under a cap and mask, but investigators matched the room behind him to photographs from his apartment. His storage unit held Grandpa's missing statements, copies of my identification, blank checks, and the counterfeit notary supplies. The security cameras showed him entering Grandpa's office after the locks were changed. Another camera placed him near my truck the night the canvas bag appeared in the back seat, and the controlled call showed that Garrett knew about the fake account, knew the original check mattered, and wanted it destroyed before the bank could separate truth from fraud. The forensic audit traced $214,600 in stolen funds, fraudulent credit, and attempted borrowing. Not every dollar had been successfully taken. That somehow made it worse. It meant the plan was still expanding when we caught him. Garrett called Mom from jail and asked her to post bail. She listened for less than a minute. Then she said, "I love you, but I will not rescue you from this." And she hung up. That choice cost her. She cried afterward. She questioned herself twice. I saw her pick up her phone like she might call back, but she did not. Grandpa refused to pay for Garrett's defense. He removed him from the will and formally cut every business connection between them. Garrett's employer fired him after learning company equipment had been used to create some of the forged records. His fiancée returned the ring and moved out. The relatives who once repeated his accusations suddenly got quiet when investigators started asking who had received them. Months later, Garrett accepted a plea agreement. Bank fraud, identity theft, elder financial exploitation, document forgery, burglary, assault-related conduct. Hearing the charges read out loud felt strange. Clean words for dirty things. Legal language made everything sound organized, almost bloodless, when I knew exactly how much damage had lived underneath each count. The judge ordered restitution, several years in state custody, and supervised release afterward. Garrett was also prohibited from contacting me or Grandpa except through attorneys. At sentencing, Garrett turned toward me. For 1 second, I saw my brother again, not the spreadsheet, not the forged documents, not the man who had planted evidence in my truck. Just the kid who used to race me down Grandpa's gravel driveway. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he added, "But none of this would have happened if Grandpa had divided the money fairly." That sentence told me his apology was still in negotiation when it was my turn to speak. I did not ask the judge to be cruel. I asked for accountability. I said the deepest harm was not the money. or the credit cards, or even the slap. It was learning that my brother had mapped our compassion and used it as a financial strategy. For years, I thought being a good son and a good brother meant standing between Garrett and consequences. I believed that was love. It was not. It was permission. Outside the courthouse, Mom asked if I felt satisfied. I thought about the fake account, Grandpa's missing statements, the bag in my truck, and Garrett screaming that I destroyed the family. No, I said, I feel finished. That was better than revenge. I did not have to ruin Garrett. I only had to stop protecting him from the results of his own choices. The bank eventually cleared the original gift and reissued it as a cashier's check. Grandpa offered to increase the amount. He said it quietly, sitting across from me at his kitchen table. One hand resting on the same scarred wood surface where we had spread out statements, forged documents, and pieces of our family that Garrett had tried to turn into evidence. "You went through hell because of that check," he said. "Let me make it right." I shook my head. $100,000 is already more than enough. The truth was, I did not want Garrett's crimes to turn Grandpa's generosity into payment for pain. The check had been a gift before my brother touched it. I needed it to stay that way. I used part of the money as a down payment on a small brick building on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Old windows, uneven floors, a loading door that stuck in cold weather. But the bones were good. I opened a restoration studio there. Furniture, old doors, damaged cabinets, antique frames, things people thought were too far gone until somebody patient enough showed them otherwise. For years, I had dreamed about that place and kept postponing it because Garrett always had a newer emergency, a rent crisis, a car problem, a debt he could not explain, a phone call from Mom asking me to be reasonable. Another part of the money went into savings, some went to therapy, legal expenses, and the long, irritating work of repairing my credit. The first thing I framed for the studio was not the check. It was a photograph of Grandpa standing beside me on opening day, holding a level while I tried to hang the sign straight. Mom took the picture. Our relationship did not heal in one conversation. She started counseling. She learned words like manipulation, enabling, and financial abuse. Sometimes she still began a sentence with, "But he's your brother." Then she would stop herself, take a breath, and try again. She apologized without asking me to forgive her on schedule. That mattered. Grandpa recovered part of the stolen money through seized accounts and restitution, but the bigger repair was slower. Fraud had made him doubt his own judgment. He kept asking how he could have missed it. I told him what Blake once told me. Trusting family was not the mistake. Garrett made the mistake when he used that trust as cover. Shame belonged to the person who deceived us, not to the people who loved him. A year after sentencing, Garrett sent a letter through his attorney. The envelope arrived at Blake's office first, because the no-contact order still meant something. Blake called me and asked if I wanted to read it there or have him summarize it. I chose to read it myself, not because I owed Garrett that, because I needed to know whether my hands would still shake. They did not. The letter was 3 pages long. Garrett wrote that prison had changed him. He said he understood why I testified. He said he had replayed the birthday, the bank, Grandpa's face, and Mom's voice over and over until he finally saw the damage he had caused. Some sentences sounded almost real. That was the dangerous part. He said he hoped, one day, we could be brothers again. Not like before, he wrote, but in some honest new way neither of us understood yet. I sat in Blake's conference room and read that line twice. Then I reached the final paragraph. Garrett asked whether I could speak to Grandpa about restoring a small part of his inheritance after his release. Not much, he said, just enough to help him rebuild. There it was, the hook under the apology. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Maybe Garrett would truly change one day. Maybe prison would strip away the performance. Maybe he would learn to apologize without attaching a request to the end of it. But his rehabilitation was no longer my assignment. I had spent too many years confusing love with access. Forgiveness, if it came, would not mean a key. Love, if it remained, would not mean surrender. On my 31st birthday, Grandpa handed me a plain envelope. For half a second, my body forgot an entire year had passed. My shoulders tightened. My fingers went cold. I looked at that envelope and saw Garrett's hand, the study door, Daniel Mercer's face turning pale behind the bank desk. Grandpa noticed. His smile was sad, but steady. "It's only a card," he said. I opened it slowly. There was no check inside, no amount written in blue ink, no financial weight disguised as paper, just a card with one sentence in Grandpa's handwriting. "The best thing you built this year was a life nobody else controls." I kept that card. Looking back, the $100,000 did change my life, but not because it bought a building. It changed my life because it exposed the price I had been paying to keep peace with someone committed to chaos. The day Garrett slapped me, he thought fear would make me obedient. Instead, fear finally made the truth impossible to ignore. Families do not survive because one person absorbs every injury. They survive when love includes honesty, boundaries, and consequences. Sometimes protecting a family means refusing to protect the person harming it. So tell me honestly, if your own brother used your identity, stole from your grandfather, tried to frame you, and expected your mother to lie for him, would you have taken the case as far as I did? And if he later claimed he had changed, would you open the door again, or would you keep the life you fought to reclaim? If this story hit close to home, subscribe for more family drama stories where the truth finally comes out. This story is a dramatized narrative for entertainment purposes. Names, locations, and details may be fictionalized.